So this is a surprising tool that we used to help create our integrated foreign matter management plan. It's a story about thinking as opposed to a technical story, and it was inspired by an auditor. So we were asked to share this with you today. So this is about an old tool that existed. We didn't invent the tool, but we came up with a new use for it. I'm a senior food safety and quality professional, and like many of you out there, my career has included time in the field. I've worked in consulting roles, I've been an independent auditor, and it may or may not be as common that for me, I also spent quite a bit of time working as a specialist in the field of health and safety. I have to say that when I first left quality, where I was familiar with the tools and knew what to do, um, I struggled a little bit as I transferred to the world of health and safety because I had so much to learn. But I also found that many of the tools that I'd learnt in my time in quality were really helpful. I used things like the fishbone diagram to facilitate brainstorming sessions, followed the 80-20 rule when I was looking for problems or opportunities to solve. So learning something new, but working with something old and familiar is just part of the way that I learn as an adult. So over time, my new specialist health and safety tools were all learnt. That was great. They became part of my everyday. Time went on, I missed my old friend quality. So down the track a bit, I jumped over the fence and back into the wonderful world of food safety and quality. And I have to say, at the time I moved over, it never occurred to me that I would bring any of those specialist tools back across to this world. So this story really is the result of a curious question. It was very gently delivered by someone I consider to be a highly skilled auditor. And I found myself on the steep learning curve as a result. And that was the time for me to look for something old and familiar, which is where the health and safety tool came in. As we go through my story, you'll be seeing that actually my first reaction was a technically thinking feeling, but that's okay. We'll talk more about that as we go. For this presentation, what I'd like to share with you is how this health and safety tool has become the hero of a food safety story, created a paradigm shift in my thinking, and just to share with you how we approached dealing with foreign matter controls. So hopefully by the end, I have provoked a curious question or two for you. Just to put some context in around my story. So this is around my learning curve. So I'd spent 30 plus years working in a high risk, high care industry. And around about 2016, I decided to leave that behind me and join the wonderful world of fast moving consumer goods. So these products are quite different to what I was used to. They are shelf stable and they were relatively low risk from a microbiological point of view. So all those friends that I had in the micro world were no longer valid, and I had this new thing to learn, a new risk profile, which was foreign matter. In the world of high risk, high care, everything is enclosed, it's very fine, it goes through filters. Foreign matter is just not something that we really deal with. In my new world, the products were not really processed to a great extent. It was wholesome food, it came from nature. The way that we put things together just naturally meant that foreign matter was a greater risk. So we whacked out about 11 million metric ton of food a year. So there's a lot of food going past. I had a really steep learning curve to work out. We had new GFSI standards to get a hold of. We had customer specific requirements. And of course, we had 30 plus years of history for the company, all those rules in place. So I immersed myself in this new world. We had 16 external audits in that first year. I thought I was doing pretty well. I'd memorised all the rule books and I felt really well prepared when our first external audit turned up. So I was doing quite well. He was looking at foreign matter. He was asking things like, what controls do you have? And the local team were pulling out various things, including good old metal detectable pens. They had toolbox registers. They had a bunch of other prescriptive requirements where we could dutifully show that we met all the requirements and our forms and records were completed. And then it happened. I'm feeling smug, thinking my role here, remember, is to provide some sort of robust framework for this business to use. And out comes a really simple question. He says to me, are these foreign matter management controls part of an overall integrated approach? I just sat there. So party face on, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have read so much, but are they part of an integrated overall approach? I'm ticking through, and I really couldn't recall any overarching philosophy that brought all this together. I remembered lots of rules. There were lots of rules. And when I thought back about what I'd read, I realised that actually, technically we were compliant, but it didn't really make a lot of sense when you put it all together. I started wondering, is there more that we could be doing? Should we be doing? And so I put my little party face on and gave him rock brilliant answer, which was, yeah, no, we just do this stuff because the standard said so. So it was a really good question, and I knew we could do so much more, and my answer really wasn't ideal. So that brought me to that place where I'm thinking, okay, so we need to do something better. Foreign matter management is our biggest risk. He's asked a really good question. What could we do? So I had a chat to some of the people who had recently joined our industry and asked them, or our company, sorry, and asked them about the rules that we had in place and how they found it. And basically, they were just overwhelmed. With those 16 external audits came a whole bunch of prescriptive requirements. And so if you imagine somebody new coming into our production environment, they were just overwhelmed. There were no clear principles, no way to put all these rules into some sort of logical order. There was just a compliance requirement and a list of rules. So really having spoken to them, I was very keen to do something better. So going back to my previous conversation, looking for something old and familiar, what could we use? What could we use? So in the wonderful world of health and safety, there is this wonderful hierarchy which has layers of control in it. And the idea, it's a very simple premise. You start with the most effective control, which is elimination. And you work your way down to the least effective control, which is detection or inspection. And the layers of control work together because the more layers you have in place, the less likely something could go wrong. So you may be familiar or you may not be familiar with the hierarchy of control. So what I'll do is just explain each step. So that eliminate step. If you can imagine, I'm going to use a good old metal detectable pen as the example all the way through for foreign matter because it's simple and it's something we can relate to. So eliminate. If I've got exposed food in my production area and there are no blue ballpoint pens, then there is no hazard, there is no risk. There is no way that this pen could end up in the food. There's no hazard, there's no risk. So it makes perfect sense to start with elimination when it comes to managing your hazards. If I gave that principle to my operators, they could start from saying something really simple like, well, we've got 10 ballpoint pens in this production room. How could we eliminate all of them? Or even just 9 out of the 10. The guys started to do this process, started to go through, started to bring the numbers down and eliminate what they could, which was great. But, we still had 1 pen left in the room. Good. What is the next most effective thing we can do if we can't eliminate? Following the principles, the next one is isolation. There are 3 different ways that you can isolate. So again, think about your food that's exposed and you have your pen. If there is a physical barrier between the hazard, the risk of foreign matter, and the food, then the foreign matter, the hazard, cannot reach the food. So that can be as simple as covering things, covering your food. It could also be something simple like tethering your pen to a clipboard. If you tether the pen to a clipboard, then there's a physical barrier preventing it ending up where you don't want it. The next type of isolation is time. If the pen is only used when the food is not present in the room, then there's no risk of it ending up in the food. If we limit for 1 hour a day is the only time you can use a pen in production, then there's a much reduced chance of it ending up in the food. So starting to isolate the food from the hazard. And the last one is by distance. If I have a 300 square metre area and my pen is in one corner and the food is in the other, that distance itself starts to become a safety feature. So the next layer, we eliminated, we got rid of as many pens as we could. The second one is isolation. We did everything we could to prevent the pen from ending up in the food. Having done both of those things, the next step is administration. And once we get down to administration, there's a lot more resource drain. So we're starting to look at signage. We're starting to look at procedures and training records. But you put a sign up that says no pens are allowed in this area, it's not going to be terribly effective. But if you couple that with the previous process, if you couple that with some training and some procedures, then it becomes a reminder. Procedures are around how we manage the pens, how we make sure that they're only where they should be, and that people have controls in place to manage them. And obviously training people so they know what they're doing. So much more resource heavy, not as effective as getting rid of the pens altogether. And the final part of the hierarchy is detection and inspection, which is having your metal detection unit, having a bright blue pen so that it's easy to see, and using that colour contrast with the food. And I guess when I look back and we were going to starting to put through and put the hierarchy in place, what we realised was actually there was kind of a mindset that the blue metal detectable pen plus the metal detector meant that we had this under control. The reflection, having put the hierarchy of controls in place and looking back, was actually that wasn't the right way to go about this. We could inspire better thinking and give the guys tools to empower them by using these simple principles. So whereas before we would have said, there's our metal detectable pen, it's in place, we're good, now we can start to ask some better questions. So having got to that point and decided, yep, we wanted to use this tool, the next thing we needed to decide was how can we take this tool from health and safety and apply it to the world of food safety? So we went back and had a look at our risk matrix. We talked to the guys on the floor about what might be useful for them and decided what we wanted to create was like a workbook, a sort of an integrated foreign matter management plan that could sit as a prerequisite under our HACCP that we could use when we're having discussions about change control, that we could use during GMP audits, that we could use for new team leaders that join the room, where it's really clear to them actually what are the rules and requirements and what's the best way for them to manage this particular hazard in their food area. So likelihood consequence, making sure they're all familiar with our risk matrix, making sure that if they put controls in place, they are actually reducing the likelihood of something going wrong, and that if that's not at an acceptable level, that they go ahead and seek some more effective controls. The next step we took was we had lots of pieces of this puzzle of integrated foreign matter management. We had lots of prescribed requirements from various customers and from various standards. But what we wanted to do now was just make sure we'd thought about everything. So we used the old fishbone diagram and had a look at, people. What are all of the hazards or foreign matter risks that come with people? So you've got your hair, the PPE itself that they're wearing, their reading glasses, whatever it may be. We looked at the methods that we had in place, and that for us may be methods around decartoning food or food handling within our environment. We looked at our machinery, so looking at what sort of covers we had in place, what additional covers we could have, but also what risks from the machinery were there that could themselves create foreign matter risks. Obviously the food, the materials that we use, we looked at our purchasing specs to make sure that we were doing the best we could. We also looked at the packaging. If you have a food item that comes in and it has string, a plastic liner, and then 3 layers of paper on the outside, obviously that's a bigger risk than something that comes in a single layer package. And finally, the environment, and it seems odd, but we've stopped taking notice perhaps the fact that our lights are covered, which is a way of preventing glass ending up in our food. The fact that we have a door that closes in a production environment prevents insects from entering the area. So we went through and did a big brainstorm on all of the potential foreign matter risks that our food could face. Once we had our big list, we wanted to group it together in a manageable size bucket, because there's nothing worse than having, again, real overwhelm, too many lists of things. So the lists that we came up with may not necessarily be the ones that another business would use, but for us, we decided we would put wood all together in one bucket. Many sources. We're a fast-moving consumer good company, and so the old cheap pallets, which some of you will be familiar with, definitely warranted their attention all by themselves. We worked through the various other things, and our pens that we talked about earlier came under loose items in the production area. So it wasn't just the pens, it was perhaps our knives, our tools, stationary items, anything else that wasn't nailed down and was able to inadvertently end up in the food. So we grouped them together in our logical order, and then we went through and marked in our hierarchy: eliminate, isolate, admin, detect, inspect. In our hierarchy, what controls did we already have and where did they sit? Which was really interesting, because this is when we had a look and found out, well, actually, the blue metal detectable pen sits at the lowest possible level, detection and inspection. And those other really good questions we should have been asking around how could we get rid of the pens altogether? What if we change it down? What if we limited its time in the room? And actually, when are we checking the pens? Where are we checking the pens? Who's doing that? Those questions then started to come together as a result of marking what we already had in place. So talking to the guys, we said, okay, that's good. It's coming together. At this point, I want to call out kudos to Vicky, who is a member of our team here in New Zealand, who got to take the fluffy concepts and try and draw them up into something meaningful. So one of the things that she did was start to put together a risk map for us so that as operators walk around the room or as leading hands in an area, they know exactly where a foreign matter risk is present so that they can see and understand in that section of their integrated foreign matter management plan exactly what controls they should be looking at. She put these together, grouped by, by wood, by metal, by glass, because that's what worked for us. It wouldn't really matter how this was done. But what it did do was just gave them a way to focus in the room physically as they walk around what's happened. And we realised afterwards we could use this as a measles diagram. If we had an incident, we could pull out the map and see, was there a risk or a hazard that we'd missed? Was there an event that we didn't have controls for? So all of that thinking then came through into what hopefully is a very familiar looking document. This is a control plan based on the HACCP control plan. So we just literally stole the one out of our HACCP, but treated it as a prerequisite for our hazards. So for foreign matter control, what is the hazard that this team leader may have in their room? What critical limit are we looking for? Is it around reduction, elimination, whatever it may be? What's acceptable? What's not? Putting in those monitoring steps, what do they need to check? How are they going to check it? When? Who will check it? And where will that check take place? Putting in here the pre-agreed corrective actions to make sure that if something went wrong, the operator and the leading hands knew exactly what action was required to control, to bring things back as we want them to be, and to make sure that that product is cared for. What procedures do they need to look to or be trained in to be able to do this? And what records should there be so that when we're doing our audit, we know exactly what records relate. This one-page summary, if I go back to my leading hand that joined the business, suddenly instead of a long list of rules that were unrelated, suddenly he has a control plan. It's really clear for him what it is that he needs to do. So we tuck all that together and bind up a very proud Vicky with an integrated foreign matter management plan. So we came up with this plan just for the process room, and I feel like this one document has summarised everything, all of that thinking, which took us a reasonable period of time. So it has those hierarchy principles in the front. It's got our food safety and quality risk metrics. It's very clear what are your preferred controls, and they're all grouped together in logical bundles that work for the operators. We have a risk plan, we have a control plan. And then also we placed an area where we could look at the residual risk levels from our food safety and quality risk metrics, that we could make some notes as we did a review or if we made improvements or we eliminated something else. And we decided we'll keep that bound copy in place for a year with all our handwritten records on it. And then at the end of the year, that becomes the record for the season, and we'll create a new document with all of the updates and issue it again. So it was absolutely an evolution. We started with pieces. This was many individual bits and bobs, but we needed the whole, we needed the logic. And so it all came through with that simple question around what could we do differently. We didn't start from nothing. We stole ideas and we reimagined how we could use them. Obvious question now is, so did anything get better as a result of all of this? And I'm thrilled to say absolutely it has. So we've seen fabulous improvements over time. It's a very holistic approach to what we're doing, and it's allowed us to recognise if something changes from when we'd first done the assessment. So we pick out one or two things that we're going to focus on getting better at, and we work really hard to get those up to that eliminate. And every time we eliminate something, we see those results come through, both in internal findings and obviously in things getting through to market. So really thrilled with how this is working for us. I think the biggest excitement for me has actually been around the operators. So really empowering for them to be able to understand what's going on in their room, to have the workbook, to have the knowledge and the confidence of what they need to do rather than just that big list of rules. It's a very simple philosophy to follow, and I hear them talking about, what if. And I guess at this point, I've made a little note here about challenging blind spots. And this is how crazy it can get with the blind spots. We were looking at literally blue metal detectable pens. We had the metal detectable catalogue out, and we're having a feast across all of the wonderful blue metal detectable things you can get, which is pretty much everything. One of the items that was in one of the rooms was scissors. They were cheap plastic handled scissors, bright orange plastic handle, not terribly robust, and from time to time those plastic handles would break. So we were so focused on trying to find scissors with a blue metal detectable handle. After 3 weeks, we could find all sorts of other things. We couldn't find their scissors. It turns out it's a health and safety issue. People are using safety knives. When Luke, one of our operators, looks at us like we've got 3 heads and said, but why wouldn't you just buy plain stainless steel ones from the admin shop? Ha. Just so focused on what we were doing, we weren't thinking outside the square. So I love that these guys now understand what we're trying to achieve and can think even better than we can. At this point, I just want to stop for a minute and reflect back that at the start, I said that this was around an auditor asking us a question. And this, for me, hugely valuable. When I have an auditor come out to site, it's one of those few occasions that I have somebody who can sit here and share what we've done, that we can show them what we've achieved, who understands the standard, who understands, the challenges that we come against. And it's really one thing for an auditor to come through and say you're compliant or you're not compliant. But I look back and I think this whole journey, this incredible improvement came about because we had somebody who was curious, who encouraged us and inspired us to do something better. I think back about the simple question, are these controls part of an overall integrated approach? And I think when I presented my woefully inadequate answer, which was, no, we just do this because the standard said so, he could have responded in so many ways. But what he did was he just paused and he went, I wonder what that might look like. And so, Mr. Auditor, I'm saying to you, well, actually, it could look like this. At the end of my story, I've really just got one thing that I'd like to say. I'm wondering, what stories will your next audit inspire?